All right, welcome back to the Southeastern 14 YouTube channel here, and a new show we've been hyping for a good week now, both Nathaniel and I on Twitter. We're going to call it House Summit, right, Nathaniel? Like, come on, if you're going to come up
Yeah,
with a show name, right?
yeah, it's got to, if you're going to do Lady Vols, especially, you got to mention Summitt somehow. So, yeah,
You got to.
absolutely.
So, no, we're excited to do this because, as you know, we've been pushing on Twitter. We're kind of expanding into doing more women's basketball stuff, and this is the starting point: is doing a show on the Lady Vols with Nathaniel. And it's something, as Nathaniel will probably laugh at, we've been wanting to do for a long time. It's just taken a while to get there, but we are excited to launch this. And so, Nathaniel, this will be fun just to kind of start our own thing here, and each week, every Tuesday, is the plan, just to kind of go through and take a look, at this ladies Vols team. So yeah, we're excited to get started.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like you said, better late than never. But better to
Right.
start here in mid-February than not doing it all. So, and plus,
Yes.
right now, interest is peaking and, heading into March and stuff. So, why not go ahead and just throw out there now and go ahead and do it, especially with Lady Vols, with, them being even still, I mean, historically, the premier women's basketball program in the SEC.
Yeah. My guess is we won't at any point introduce a UConn show. Now you never know with expansion, Nathaniel,
I
right?
mean, that's a
Because
good point.
with conference expansion, you never know. UConn could make their way to the conference at some point. But for now, we're Southeastern 14. We will become Southeastern 16 when Texas and Oklahoma join. So
Mhm.
we have to keep that in mind as well as fans of,
Yeah.
of the teams here.
Unlike the names of the conferences, you guys actually update your numbers. You're not going to
Yeah.
be they're going to be the Southeastern 14 and be actually like 10 teams or
Yeah.
something like that.
We try to stay out of the curve here. So that's what we try to do. Not always works, but like you said, it's better late than never to get this thing going. And the genius that I am, hey, let's do this towards the end of the season. We probably should have done this earlier, but it's fine. If you're here, you have some interest in the Lady Vols, and again, that's what we're here to talk about. And so, Nathaniel, let's start with coming off of a certainly wild game, to say the least, at Mississippi State. The Lady Vols bounced back at 86-59 win over Vanderbilt. Of course, the season sweep completed there. Look, if you watch this game, if you kind of know Vanderbilt's situation, um, you know, fielding a team has kind of been a challenge when you just consider the numbers game and such there this season with injuries and such. But look, this was a game at half, right? I mean, it's tied at halftime. You're wondering. I know, if you're watching this from the Lady Vol standpoint, you're thinking back thinking, boy, this does not feel right. Shouldn't be that way. But a big second half kind of fuels Tennessee in this game. Obviously, Rakia Jackson 21, Jordan Orfston 18, Darby with 14. I think, Nathaniel, this was kind of it's that tricky game, right? Because you are playing a team where at this point, again, Vanderbilt has nothing to lose. It's a rivalry game. You can never know about those kind of things. But the big difference here, when you watch it, it's the rebounding numbers, right? Like, it's just completely dominating the rebounding advantage there. I think they had a 19-second chance points, out rebounded Vanderbilt by 26. That was sort of the name of the game, and again, that was a big part of fueling that second half.
Yeah, like you said, it was weird first half, tied at the first quarter, tied at halftime, and you're thinking, okay, I mean, this is just typical Tennessee Vanderbilt, and both. I mean, Vanderbilt's given Lady Vols fits over the last few years too, but obviously you think on the men's side, and what just happened with them in Nashville, you're thinking, oh gosh, is this going to happen? Is Vandy going to come out and do something to the women's side as well? But like you said, rebounding, second chance points were huge in that second half. And you obviously can't overlook what Tess Darby brought on the 3-point line as well. But they really, finally just asserted the dominance in the second half. And like you said, really good bounce back performance after bounce back win after not a bad performance against Mississippi State. But man, it was such a frustrating game. And it's that to me, I think that game more than any other this season possibly is kind of a microcosm of this Lady Vols season as a whole so far. Again, we've still got a few more games left. Right now, Lady Vols are still very firmly in the third spot in the SEC at 10-2, 18-9 overall. But it was a game where Lady Vols in the Mississippi State game, they probably should have won it multiple times. But give them credit for fighting and doing what they did in that game. But then you had, gosh, I'm trying to even remember what all happened in that game. It feels like a million years
It
ago.
feels like forever ago,
But
right?
going in overtime in that one, it got way too stressful and it got way too out of control. which has been, again, turnovers have been an issue at times this year for the Lady Vols. There's been games they've been really clean with it, and there's been games where they have 20 plus turnovers in a game, and you're like, oh my gosh, like how's this happening still? So I'm sure we'll talk more about that in a second. But yeah, I mean, again, after that kind of loss and an emotional loss, because again, Rikia playing her former team, obviously she was very invested. She played really well in that game too. To come back and I think you saw some of those. I won't say tired legs, but you saw some of the maybe carryover from that game in the first half against Vandy, and then again, second half it was just complete domination that Lady Vols took advantage of their size. Jillian Hollingshead again had a pretty good game there too, along with Rikia and Horston. So um, I'd be very interested to see. We'll talk in a minute about the next couple games because they're games that Tennessee again, like Vandy, really shouldn't struggle with. You look at the final score, you should see a Tennessee win by 10, 15, 20 points for both of these games coming up. But they're games that are going to be crucial because we've seen it both men's and women's side this year. You can't take any game for granted in the SEC. Any teams can sneak up and beat anybody except for maybe South Carolina in the conference this year, I think.
Yeah, it's like you said, it's interesting to point out just some of those trends because, and look, like you mentioned too, it's all always about the response. When we certainly, if you look at our YouTube channel, right, and all the men's basketball videos we've done this year, we've talked about some of these teams and how they respond. Like, how do you respond from a game like that? And like you said, it's a deflating game because you feel like you had so many situations where, all right, if we just did this here, just did that there, we win that game. And then, that obviously gives you a little bit of an extra boost. And you're sitting there, what, at 11-1 in the conference right now versus 10-2. And guess what? So is LSU now after that game against South Carolina. So, yeah, so it's frustrating from that regard. But I think you brought up a good point. It's like coming out of a game like that, a double overtime game, the mental, physical energy that goes into that, especially when you're on the losing ends. And again, the sort of deflating feeling, right? You come in next game playing a team that 2 and whatever in the conference and have nothing to lose, and coming in trying to shock the world essentially, and you just don't get off to the best start. But I think it's the response and how they responded in the second half. You got to be really optimistic because what I mean, they outscored them 48-21, I guess it was, because it was tied at halftime. So yeah, I think that was probably my biggest takeaway, is just to see that kind of response. But you alluded to something that we will talk about in a second, is turnovers. And there's a team on their upcoming schedule here this week that does force some turnovers when you look at it statistically. So that's something else to keep in mind. But I thought that was my biggest takeaway, is just to respond in and of itself, knowing that that's a game you have to win, but it's one where you're coming off such a deflating loss. I thought that was a big takeaway for me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think this team has responded pretty well after most losses this year.
I was looking that up. Yeah,
aside from earlier in the year, they haven't had. I don't think they've had back-to-back losses in a while now. It was said, early in the year they did because they had played such a tough schedule, non-conference. But it's
UCLA, Gonzaga. Yeah,
it's been a minute since they've had back-to-back losses.
Well, I guess UConn and LSU, right?
But that's a different story,
that's right?
Very different.
That's different.
That's a little different. That's
a little
top 5 teams that you played back to back.
We won't count that.
No, and I mean I get to like actual Lady Vol fans, not the ones on Twitter that just get mad when Lady Vols lose, but actual fans. I get them saying, well, Lady Vols should be, should we be to a point where facing back to back top 5 teams, we should be able to get one of those wins. And I'll say, that's I think a broader conversation about kind of where this team is, where the program is. But that game against LSU was there for the taking. And if that game had been in Thompson Bowling, I think I don't know that the Lady Vols would have won, but I think it would have. Obviously, look at last year. Obviously, different rosters from last year, this year. But I was actually at that game in the stands for that one, at the regular season finale last year against LSU. That was a tough game. That was a game where Lady Vols came back and just never quite could actually close the gap, and they got it down to 1 point deficit and then just never could overcome it. But I mean, this year's schedule has been so brutal. But again, for the most part, they've responded pretty well. Like you said, that's been their last back-to-back losses, and you can kind of overlook that a little bit. But they've done really well in SEC play. And granted, they haven't. I feel like on the women's side, the SEC is very top-heavy. Obviously, I think South Carolina is. I mean, they've proven it. They're easily the number 1 team in the country. I think LSU is on that next echelon in terms of you kind of looking at the status of the SEC teams. I think Tennessee's kind of on their. I honestly think they're on their own in third because they beat Ole Miss and they beat them pretty handily. To be honest, when they beat them, they played them pretty tough and played them pretty well. And Ole Miss is right there in the fourth. But I think once you get to Ole Miss, it gets kind of Ole Miss, Bama, and Mississippi State. I think are kind of all grouped together on the women's side and kind of. Those are gonna be interesting to see who gets the 4 seed, who gets that final double bye for the SEC tournament. Right now, Ole Miss is sitting pretty with 9-3, but I mean, anything can happen here as time goes on. But Lady Vols have the advantage of having that head-to-head win over Ole Miss, so right now they're fairly firmly in the 3rd seed. That's going to take them having to lose, I think, 2 more times that Ole Miss having to win out for them to drop from there. So right now, Lady Vols are pretty firmly in that 3rd spot. No matter, again, they'd have to collapse pretty hard moving down the stretch, and Ole Miss would have to play pretty well. But I think overall, where the program is this year, the record maybe is an indication of maybe how good the team is. And you also take into account they, going into the season, they were planning on having Tamari Key for the whole year. Then she goes down early in the season. Obviously, you've had time to adjust everything now, but how different would this team be if they had Tamari Key on a regular, night in, night out basis? So, I forgot what even prompted my whole rant there, but the whole point is
get used to it, folks. That's going to be this show.
That's going to be me. I'm going to do that a lot for talking about the Lady Vols. But just bouncing back, I think was what you're asking. We're talking about was their ability to bounce back, and that's going to be it's good. But Blake, once you get into postseason play, there are bounce back opportunities. You lose, you're done. So I admire this team's ability to bounce back, but I think they really need to get better about the consistency because that's been the big issue. They've had some moments of looking really good, even within games. Look at the UConn game. Came out and just granted UConn was just shooting the leather off the ball in that first quarter, but even still, the defense was not doing a very good job at all for the Lady Vols in that game either. And then second quarter, come back and all of a sudden it's a game because defense steps up and plays a lot better. Offense starts clicking a little bit better, and then suddenly it's like I think a 5-point deficit at halftime where it was like they gave up 30-something points in the first quarter, and then again you kind of UConn does their thing in the second half. But that even within games this year, it's been playing very poorly in a quarter, and then they're coming back and playing really well in another quarter. So that's been the problem with this team all season. There's been games where they look like, okay, this is a team that can make an Elite Eight, maybe even Final Four type run, and then there's games you're like, this team could get bounced in the first round. Like there just hasn't been consistency, and that's been what's so frustrating because you see when you watch these games, you see the potential for this team, and you see the potential is very high, but then unfortunately that basement is also pretty low because we've seen turnover after turnover after turnover in some games, and it's just shooting themselves in the foot has been a huge problem this year for them.
Well, and it's almost like this remaining schedule in the regular season, and we'll get to at the end, we'll get to the Arkansas and Auburn games, but it's like it's almost set up to like test that, right? Mm-hmm. Because when you look at it and you're like, okay, you see where some of these teams are at. You get Arkansas kind of in the middle, Auburn's towards the bottom. You're going to get obviously Kentucky, who is also down there at 2-10, just like Vanderbilt was. But then you're going to get South Carolina too. And so it's like you kind of have that mix of the consistency has to be there because you are kind of playing teams from literally like, you feel like it's like the all 4 kind of quadrants of the SEC. Like you're talking about the team at the very top. You got a team that's kind of in the middle, team near the bottom. Then you got a couple teams down there, I guess, Auburn and Kentucky lumped together. But so I feel like that's something that will kind of test them and how that's impacted where they sit right now, which I will get there before we go to these, kind of quick previews on this week's games. But, NCAA tournament, bracketology, it's that time of year. Everyone's talking about it. You're trying to figure out, okay, there's not that many games left in the regular season. We'll be playing conference tournament action in a couple weeks now. Like it's not that far away. 4 games left in the regular season for the Lady Vols and everyone else. But here's where things sit right now and where ESPN has it. The updated bracketology, which, it would have been updated. We're recording this on Tuesday. So it was updated Tuesday morning. Here's where things are at. So Tennessee, before we get there, let's just talk about like the bubblicious SEC here because
there are a ton of teams in the bubble.
you've got some bubbles in the SEC right now. So Georgia, is among the last 4 in. Mississippi State is the last team in. So you think about the significance of that win against
Yeah.
Tennessee, right? And what that does. So as of right now, Mississippi State will be the last team in. Arkansas, one of the teams in the last 4 buys. So of course, by no means a lock, but they're there. They're in position to be in position. That's the phrase, right? Ole Miss trending downward as a 9 seed. So that's something to sort of keep in mind here. And you talked about kind of the Tennessee Ole Miss result. So Ole Miss, you would assume still a team that needs to take care of business the rest of the way, not to put themselves in that position. Alabama's at an 8 seed right now. We all know South Carolina's the top seed, but LSU's the number 2. But it's just like, boy, it's going to be interesting from the SEC standpoint. Now to Tennessee, who sits as of this moment in the bracketology from ESPN as a number 7 seed against Washington State, the number 10 seed. Now, would this be played? The projection right now, Durham, North Carolina. So you know who the number 2 seed is, right? In terms of this regional, this part of the bracket, Durham, where Duke is the number 2 seed. So Indiana, by the way, is the number 1 seed in the, I guess this is the Greenville 2 region. So Indiana the 1, Duke the 2, Maryland would be the 3, Tennessee again the 7. So that's your setup right now, and I think we've seen Tennessee and Indiana play. So if you're looking for that, Elite 8 matchup there, Nathaniel, there's at least some interesting storylines in this region with a potential matchup with Duke or even a rematch with Indiana further down the line.
I would hate that bracket for the Lady Vols, but also if I were at Indiana or Duke, that is a brutal bracket. Having Indiana as the 1, which I think they're good, but then if you're Indiana, you have Duke and Maryland as the 2 and 3. Like that's awful for Indiana. Those are 2 really good teams.
Colorado the 4.
Yeah, Colorado and Tennessee. Lady Vols played them. Lady Vols beat them earlier this year. Of course, again, that feels like forever ago. That was a totally different team for Tennessee and for Colorado, really. But that I can only imagine. I don't want it to happen, but I can only imagine what Twitter and what social media would be like if the Lady Vols had to play Duke and it was Kara Lawson versus Kelly Harper versus Lady Vols, because I've already seen people who are most extreme on the end of the Lady Vol. Well, I guess I don't even know what their fans are. They're Vol fans who I think sometimes like to pretend to be Lady Vol fans who call for Kelly Harper's head and saying that maybe she needs to be fired. The people they're clamoring the most to get would be Kara Lawson, which I mean I get it. I mean, look what she's doing at Duke. Right. She went from, I think her first year there was the COVID year, and they shut down, or the COVID shortened season, and they just shut down after the first few games and didn't have a season period. So now having them as a top 10 team and to being a potential 2 seed in the NCAA tournament, and Duke's had a pretty good history. They used to be very good on the women's side, and they dropped off a little bit there. Now it seems like Kara Lawson's got them kind of rolling again here. That would be intriguing in a lot of areas, but also I would personally hate it because if Tennessee loses that game, if they play Duke and lose and it's not really a super close game, I already know what social media, what Facebook, what Twitter is going to look like, and I don't want that to happen. So as much as I think it'd be cool to see Tennessee play Kara Lawson and have a chance to pull that upset, my faith wouldn't be super high that it would happen, and I just don't want it. I don't want it to happen for this team and for that and this coaching staff to have to deal with that, because it's already going to be a rough off season if they don't make it past the Sweet 16, because of what the expectations were before this season. And there's just no need to add more fuel to that fire that's already going to be there. And then again, I do think it's a vocal minority. I don't think there's going to be any sort of change that happens this off season with the head coach, unless something insane happens,
right?
But
lose out or something, and
lose out, or some scandal comes out, which I would be stunned that happened with this coaching staff. But there's already, all the questions about why is there not a recruit committed to the 23 class, and different things about development and how this team's chemistry has or hasn't been this year. And there's already a lot of questions. We don't need more, Blake. There doesn't need to be more drama already added to what I think is going to be a fairly dramatic offseason. I would love to be proven wrong. I'd love for this team to go and at least make it to the Elite 8, and do something that, they gel together here in the last, 4 or 5 games of the regular season and gel together in the SEC tournament, and then go make a run. Again, it's like you mentioned, it's really going to depend on what the bracket looks like.
Yep.
If they can move up to a 6 seed somehow, or maybe I don't think they'll move any higher than that, but if they can get just a better draw than what that projection is, that there's a chance. It's really, you never know until you actually get the bracket and lay it in front of you, and then obviously you don't even know until you play the games. But it's really going to depend on, to me, if Tennessee gets matched up with teams that have exceptionally good backcourt play, because that's where the issues has been when teams that have really good guard play are able to press the Lady Vols and press that backcourt and force turnovers. That's been the biggest issue, because Tennessee already does to me, not a great job with self-inflicted wounds, and it doesn't help when you have a really good defensive team that's really good at also inflicting wounds. And as you hinted at it, they already have a team like that on the schedule coming up here soon too, which worries me a little bit. But that's to me like the biggest issue is if we're playing a team that's bigger and has kind of a good front court, I'm not that worried because Tennessee has a really good front court. They have really good post players and a player like Jordan Horston, who is so versatile that she can play against the post. She can play against good guards. Like I'm not as worried if there's a team that has some good post presence as I am if it's a team that UConn had such good guard play. And that game was so unfun to watch when I was at it because except for the second quarter, because the guards were just so, they have good post players too. They have good everything, but that's why I think the LSU game was so much different because they were much more post oriented. They have good guards, don't get me wrong, but obviously Angel Reese is the big draw there, and she's a post player. And that's why I'm going to be curious to see what happens against South Carolina, because obviously you have Alea Boston, and not looking forward to Tennessee having to play her, but
no one is.
And their guards are very good too. They have some very underrated players because Boston gets all of the credit and all of the attention, but they have some really good players on that team, like Beal for one too. But I think that one, it's going to be interesting. It's not going to be fun because it's going to be. I think Carolina wins that game, but your point about the bracketology, it's really going to depend on the draw the Lady Vols get, because the seeding is one thing, but it's really going to depend on what that first round and second round matchup looks like in terms of what's the guard play going to be like, where, like you said, if it's in Durham or where's the game actually going to take place? Does Tennessee stay in the Greenville region? Do they go somewhere else? So there's a lot to question to look ahead to and try to, a lot to really figure out here in the last 4 regular season games. And then of course you said, the tournament, conference tournaments and stuff too.
Well, if you want to do a comparison, we'll quickly do this and then we'll go into the previews for the games to wrap up. But, again, if you're Tennessee and you're a 7 right now in Durham, the other locations as of this second, remember, this is going to certainly change by the time we get there, but Iowa City would be 1 with Iowa as a 2. Salt Lake City would be 1 with Utah as a 2. And LSU, of course, would be 1 with Baton Rouge as a 2, which they're not going to get sent there. So that's something to consider if Tennessee's a 7. If you're looking at the 6th line, can Tennessee move up? Of course they sure can. They can still move up. But the current 6th line, Arizona, which is, they have the arrows up or down, right? So teams trending up or down. So it kind of gives you an idea of who's where. Arizona, no arrows. So kind of firmly right there as a 6 now. Louisville is a 6 trending upward. And some others, let's see, South Florida trending upward as a 6 and Florida State trending downward as a 6. So again, those are just kind of some comparisons. If you want to look at it, the number 1 seeds, of course, South Carolina, we just mentioned Indiana, UConn, and Stanford. So, all about the draw when you get to the NCAA tournament. And so I think if playing your way up is always advised, right, Nathaniel? So playing your way up higher, it'll help you.
If you're looking for some teams to root against, if you're a Lady Vols fan, you want them to move up. Blake just listed off a few there with Florida State and Louisville.
Yes.
You want them to lose if you want Lady Vols to move up. And obviously Tennessee to keep winning, but you want them to lose if you want Tennessee to move up a seed line or 2.
Yep, that is the goal if you're going to make that movement. But, of course, you have to take care of your business, which leads us to the final area here, and that is looking at the upcoming games, which the first one will be at Arkansas on Thursday. That is, it's an interesting game because, Arkansas, we talk about Vanderbilt, right? Vanderbilt has nothing to lose. Well, they kind of showed that to Arkansas where they were able to get that win. So Arkansas coming off a tough loss to Vanderbilt. And we talk about significant stretches. We just said it a minute ago, looking at the bracketology for Arkansas. They're right there where they can possibly play their way in or out, depending on the results of these next 3 games. They got Tennessee, Georgia, and Mississippi State. So And remember, what are those three teams have in common? We just said it. They're all pretty much grouped together in terms of their NCAA tournament hopes right now. So a lot's going to be determined with those games specifically when you look at it, and especially for Arkansas. Of course, Aaron Barnum, I think, is the name you're going to circle for Arkansas in terms of what she can do. Just efficiency offensively. I think she's second in the lead behind Boston in field goal percentage right now.
Wow.
So that is, that's something you have to deal with. They're also second in the league in 3-pointers made. So it's a team that's going to be able to hit some shots from outside. And as well, I was looking up the stats. I feel like every Arkansas team, I feel like Nathaniel, I can say this about any Arkansas team in history. They're going to get to the free throw line. Like men's teams, right? Like it's just every Arkansas basketball team, I feel like always finds a way to get to the free throw line. So that's something else they do well. So a road matchup, that makes this one, again, Arkansas, as we said, is kind of a team that's has a lot to play for because they're trying to play their way into this thing. So makes for an interesting setup for this game on Thursday.
Yeah, and you're playing at Arkansas, which is not going to be easy. I think I'm looking at right now. I think the only game they've lost at home this year, okay, lost to Alabama and almost recently too. I forgot about that, but otherwise they've been, and even those are competitive losses. They lost by 3 to Alabama and 3 to Ole Miss at home. But the only other loss they've had at home this year has been LSU. So I mean, they've been very solid at home this year too. And I mean, Lady Vols haven't. That's the thing; they haven't been bad on the road. I think they've played actually some pretty good games on the road this year. So, I think about the LSU game again. I think they played well in that game. I think at the end it just got away from them. But yeah, that's. I didn't realize that about how good. Well, what's her name is? I just forgot who you said, but how she's right behind Boston in terms of the efficiency and just what she does. Like it's gonna be that's what this Thursday, Thursday at 7:00, and it's gonna be on SEC Network. So finally, a game that's not streaming only.
Finally,
that's a whole other rant for another day. I can go on about how many games haven't been on TV for the Lady Vols this year, but that game concerns me a lot. Arkansas was a tough out for UT last year. It's gonna be another tough one this year. I mean, you look at the last 4 remaining regular season games. I mean, it's. You can chalk up South Carolina as a loss. I mean, that's just, I hate to say it, but it is what it is. Right. That's Tennessee can win it. I just don't think they're going to. Probably going to be a loss there. You would like to think Auburn and Kentucky are going to be wins based on where they are and the standings and kind of how their seasons have gone and basically more or less how Tennessee's played them in years past. Obviously, Kentucky in the SEC tournament last year, notwithstanding. But the Arkansas game is kind of the pivot game for the remaining regular season because, like you said, Arkansas needs this win, and Mississippi State needed that win against Tennessee, and they got it. Again, that one was on the road. Lady Vols on the road for this one too against another desperate team. The Lady Vols I think are in. I mean, unless they lose out, they lose to both Auburn and to Kentucky.
You lose to South Carolina, right? It doesn't hurt you. So that one you kind of just take out.
Yeah, so I think Lady Vols are in. So it's a matter of Arkansas, playing a team they need a win like this to help build the resume. Lady Vols just need to get the win to move on and take care of business. Again, this is the Lady Vols have played pretty well against teams that are kind of tournament-ish teams. It's been like the upper, obviously the upper echelon teams they've struggled the most against, like the LSU's and
top 10-ish teams.
Those types of top 15, top 10 teams where they've had the most issues, but they've played fairly well against the these fringe and or like kind of lower seeded NCAA tournament type teams this season. So, I mean, the thing that always scares me when the Lady Vols play, as I mentioned earlier, is teams that are very good guard-oriented teams, not just defensively, but the teams that can make a lot of threes. Mm-hmm. Because for whatever reason this year, that's been when it's not been turnovers, the big Achilles heel for the Lady Vols has been stopping the opponents when they are hot from 3. And that's been where Tennessee's been getting killed a lot of games, has been teams making a lot of threes on them. The men and women have that in common. When the men's team gives up a lot of threes, they lose. When the women's team gives up a lot of threes, they lose. That's why I like Tess Darby a lot, because she's able to help equalize that some, but she's kind of the only one that really does it consistently for Lady Vols. Jordan Powell doesn't really, or usually Jasmine Powell doesn't bring a whole lot from 3-point range. Jordan, I'm just not Horson. Horson doesn't shoot super well from 3 either. I'd like to see her have been able to improve on that, but it is what it is. She does so much other stuff well that you can overlook that. But this team just doesn't have a whole lot of other shooting from three aside from Darby, and she's very good. But if she's not on that night, then you're probably not getting more than 3 or 4 threes as a team, and it's just hard to win in modern college basketball now if you're not getting at least
Right.
5, 6, 7 threes. Even on the women's side, like it's just hard to do that. Even though the women's side is still more post oriented than I think the men's side is, it's still hard to win if you're not consistently getting a good 15, 20 points from 3-point range. So Arkansas game worries me. I mean that's the one that I'm like the most worried about because it's probably going to be the closest. It's the most evenly matched of the remaining
And it's on the
games.
road, right?
Right, it's on the road
Yeah.
because you expect Tennessee to beat Auburn and Kentucky, and you unfortunately expect them to lose to South Carolina. This is the biggest kind of toss-up game remaining in the regular season. So it's like, there's a little bit of nerves there for me when I think about this one.
Well, and you said, like, we talked about Barnum. She's averaging 16.4 points per game, 7 rebounds per game, but it's the 3-point shooting. And, they've got about 3 players, I want to say, that are all around like the 32% to 35%
Yeah.
3-point range, right? And that is it's Chrissy Carr, Kayla Daniels, Samara Spencer. They have all made, and let me pull this number up. I had it earlier. Carr's made 61 threes this year. Daniels made 48 threes. Spencer's made 44 threes. So like that's a pretty solid number for all 3 of those. And so that is something I think you have to deal with defensively. And you talked about that earlier. The consistency specifically on the defensive end of the floor. And we'll get to the turnovers in this next game because there's another stat that could worry a little bit with the Auburn game. Maybe not as much as this one because it's on the road, but yeah, like this is motivation, right? Like,
Yeah, and
Arkansas is motivated.
apologies if you said it and I didn't hear it, but they don't. Arkansas shoots pretty okay from three. Like as a team, they're shooting basically 31%.
Yeah,
I didn't know this. Still looked up just now. They've attempted the most 3-pointers.
Yeah, so they're gonna put them up.
Yeah, 700 on the season so far. 702 to be exact. So yeah, that's concerning. And Tennessee on the kind of on the opposite end has shot 479. They're about. I mean, honestly, like as a team, like as percentages, they're fairly even.
Yeah.
Arkansas is 30.9 and the Lady Vols are 30.5. So like they make percentage wise about the same, but Auburn's shooting a lot more. So again, if you're making 30% and you've only shot 10, that's 9 points. You're making 30% and you've shot 20, that's 18 points. So you're doubling,
Right.
so that's the difference. So yeah, that's where I think this game's going to be won or loss is can the Lady Vols do enough from their second chance opportunities that they're so good at getting? Can they do enough from there and getting to the free throw line and making their free throws to negate what Arkansas is going to do, shooting the threes? And as you said, they're also very good at getting to the free throw line.
All right, Auburn on Saturday. Again, this one feels a little less stressful in a sense. Just for reference, future shows. Like I'm always going to be the person that points out, like I'm not being pessimistic, but it's like I'm just going to lay the numbers out there for you, and you can decide what to do with them as you look at it. So it's been here's what I've got in my notes. It's a season of streaks for the Tigers here because they hit, I don't know, 7-game winning streak, 6-game losing streak, 3-game winning streak, 3-game losing streak. Like that's been their season for the past however many months, several months. Winning streak, losing streak, winning streak, losing streak. Like that's just kind of how it's gone for Auburn this year. But what specifically has stood out the past 3 games, they've not been able to score.
Yep.
I think they haven't scored more than 51 points in the last 3 games. Now, again, competition matters too, but they've got to play A&M on Thursday. So obviously we don't know the result of that as we're talking about it now. But Aisha Coulibaly, she just kind of does it all. If you look at her numbers, I mean, she can kind of do everything. Very versatile player. That's going to add a lot, I think, in this game. If Auburn's going to have a chance, right, it's going to have to go through her. But here's the numbers I have pulled up. And you talk about the turnovers. This is something Auburn does very, very well. They can force turnovers. And I think that's something – I'm going to have to look this up again. I'm pretty sure they're second. No, I don't know if they're second. They're 5th in the league in steals per game. They're at 9.5 steals per game. So, I mean, look, it's not – that's still in the top half of the league, right? It's top 5 in the league in terms of forcing steals. So I think that's something that you can look at and say, all right, if you're finding a path for Auburn, what could be the one thing that we're talking about? Let's say an upset happens. It's probably that. It's just that they found a way to force a lot of turnovers. Otherwise, certainly this is a game that Tennessee should win against a team that's 3-9 in the league.
Yeah, and you mentioned it's insane. Like when they lose because they can't score anything. Like you mentioned, they scored 46 against Bama, 48 against Carolina, 51 against Arkansas. You look at the 3 wins, it was 77, 71, 66. But then before that, too, I mean, some of the scoring outputs are just terrible. 58 points against Mississippi State, 54 against LSU, 57 against Bama, 42 against South Carolina, 56 against Missouri, 47 against Ole Miss. Like, that's how they started SEC play, was by not scoring more than 60 points in a single game until they finally got that 77-76 win against Ole Miss. Like, that to me makes me feel reassured about this game. Like you said, they do a good job of forcing steals and forcing turnovers and stuff. But the Lady Vols defense has gotten better as the season's gone on. There were a lot of issues early on in the year, and when they faced the elite teams like UConn and LSU, it's still been kind of an issue. Auburn does not have lead offense. More often than not, they're not.
If they didn't force turnovers, I don't know where they'd be offensively, right? Because you have to assume that's helped too when they score.
Right.
So
getting those points off turnovers and fast break opportunities. I'm sure that's played a lot into their point totals in the wins they've gotten, because when they've lost, I don't think this season, Blake, unless I missed it, I think when they've lost this season, I don't think they've scored 60 points in a single loss.
It's not been good.
So that's why, like you said, I don't feel as bad about that one, because I think the Lady Vols are going to be able to do well defensively in that game to keep them under that 60-point mark. And if they do that, I mean, you should win. The Lady Vols, I think, have enough offense. Because I think Auburn's defense, like you said, is very good about forcing turnovers, but I don't think they're great efficiently at other areas is the problem. So really that one and the Kentucky game, like those don't scare me a whole lot. It's just the Arkansas, then of course South Carolina, but we'll talk about that probably next week. But the next 2 games before our next episode, I mean, if you can going 2-0 this week would be huge. Getting to that 21 win mark would be huge right now, considering everything that's happened this season, considering what we've dealt with recently, especially too with some of the losses you've had. But getting to 21 wins going into that South Carolina game, that would be huge, because at that point you're not going to be ranked, but like you're going to be on the fringe of being a top 25 team at that point. If you're 21-8 or 21-8 and you play really well against South Carolina and keep it competitive for the whole game. I mean, heck, if you win, obviously that's something different, but if you at least keep it competitive, that's gonna play well, I think, in the minds of the selection committee. When you look at just the brutal schedule Tennessee's had all season, and you play really well against the number one team, the obviously number one team that just dismantled LSU, like that could play well for a team that is going into the SEC tournament, fingers crossed, 22 wins, 9 losses, and you just played your last 2 biggest opponents against LSU and South Carolina. You played pretty well against both of them, so that would be. Obviously a win would be gigantic, but that would be big enough as it is, in my opinion, of playing well, keeping it close, and looking like, hey, we belong here. We're not outmatched type of thing.
If you're a Tennessee fan, watch the Auburn Texas A&M game closely, because if they lose that game, the trend will continue of the losing streak, right? Like you feel pretty good, but if they win that game, look out, Nathaniel. Like the trend will tell you they're going to win the next one. So
that's what we need, is this team losing to Auburn like last year's team did. Gosh,
I think it's going to be a challenge because of the scoring output, like you said. So we'll see, because again, a very intriguing game on Thursday against Arkansas. Depending on how that unfolds, obviously, we'll change kind of what the storyline is going into Auburn on Saturday. But Nathaniel, we made it. Somehow, first episode, no like technical glitches, no anything. Now there is I've got this, so I've got full disclosure, like on my screen, I've got one of those things that like dims your computer light like at night. So as it's gotten darker since we started, like I feel like it's like, I don't know, like my orange is like getting way more.
You're just becoming more and more Tennessee. Like you're just.
But that's good for the Tennessee show, right?
Right.
So, like, I had that planned, of course, but no. In all seriousness, this was a lot of fun, and I knew we were making a good decision to bring you on to talk about this every week, because, like I said, this is something you and I have talked about for years now. Being able to do, and finally, now that Southeastern 14, and obviously, if you're new to this and you're just joining this for the first time, and you're like, all right, I don't know anything about Southeastern 14. All you got to do is hit that subscribe button, go back to the main page here on the YouTube channel, and you can see all the content we put out covering SEC basketball, baseball, football. It's all there. We do multiple videos per day. So of course, if you're a Tennessee fan, a lot of football stuff this offseason, talking a lot about Tennessee basketball on the men's side right now. baseball as well, which I think they're going to be pretty good there too. Nathaniel, spoiler alert.
Yeah.
So we've just got so much stuff. You can go back through, check out anything you missed. Again, we've got almost 6,500 subscribers here on the channel. So we would love to have you join that number and be someone that subscribes, because that will be how you will get this each week. You can turn your notifications on, but just for reference, if you turn those on, you're going to get notified a lot, probably about non-Tennessee stuff. But we appreciate you subscribe to the channel. And of course, Nathaniel, let everybody know, again, where they can follow you on Twitter. I know that's how a lot of people are going to be getting to this. But this is, again, something that we're excited to do every week. And anything else you want to plug before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, as you can probably still see it on the screen there, I'm just
Yeah.
at Mr._Rutherford on Twitter, so you can just go follow me on there. And I talk mostly about basketball, the men's and women's basketball teams at Tennessee. And obviously, football season, I'll talk about that. Baseball season coming up, I'll talk about that too. But also, if you're into Star Wars and stuff, you'll see me tweet about that plenty too.
Yeah.
But I'm just happy to have a place to talk about basketball again, because I did my own podcast for a while and got burnt out on it because it was a bunch of editing and stuff that just me doing it alone. So now, thankfully, Southeastern 14.
You don't have to worry about that now. So
yeah, and y'all have such a great team too. So I'm happy to talk about basketball, and specifically women's basketball too, giving more coverage to that. I think, very glad you guys are doing that, and giving more coverage to women's sports in general, specifically with basketball though, because they need it, they deserve it. So they work just as hard as the men do. So I'm very happy to talk about that on here.
Yep. No, we're glad to have you. And again, hit that subscribe button. We got a lot more women's basketball stuff coming. This is kind of the launching point for everything. And again, it's the best way to keep up with all of that. So we appreciate you watching here, the first episode of the new show, House Summitt. We're gonna use that, even if that doesn't catch on. We're gonna use that. So there you go. That's how we're gonna do it. But again, we appreciate you watching. If you like the show, hit that like button, and again, hit the subscribe button. Let us know if you enjoyed it in the comments. And we'll be back next week with another episode here on the Southeastern 14 YouTube channel.